Welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast, where we're working to help you call a truce with your anxiety. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here's your host, Elizabeth Cush, LCPC.
Welcome back to the Woman Worriers podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cush, and I am a therapist in Annapolis, Maryland, where I am doing all online therapy right now. But very soon, my business will be expanding into coaching, which I'm excited to be able to reach more people and work with people across the country, maybe across the world, who knows. But if you'd like more information or would like to be kept up to date about that or the podcast or all of it, you can sign up for my newsletter. If you go to progressioncounseling.com/Elizabeth's-newsletter, you can get signed up for that, and you'll get a free meditation guide as well as a guide for mindfulness in everyday life, all for free. You'll also get updates on the podcast and my business. So there you go, and some free little mindfulness resources twice a month. So that's where you find that. Today, my guest is Michelle Dixon. We had recorded an episode probably 3 months ago, and the sound quality was pretty terrible, and Michelle was so kind to come back and re-record the episode, so I'm very excited to share this. We are talking about preverbal and developmental trauma and how to heal and how to recognize it. So Michelle is located in Australia, which was also kind of fun and exciting to be talking to somebody halfway across the world. So I so appreciate her coming back on and re-recording this amazing episode. Michelle is going to share her expertise, but also share a free resource that she is offering to all the listeners and all the people who follow her on social media. So Michelle Dixon is a trauma specialist and mindfulness coach, originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and now based in Sydney, Australia. She began her practitioner career as a bodyworker with several different modalities in her toolkit, and then gained qualifications in hypnotherapy and went on to facilitate more than 30 workshops in emotional healing. She believes in a holistic approach to trauma recovery, which includes releasing trauma from the body, rewiring the mind, and realigning with wholeness. I really enjoyed this conversation with Michelle, so let's get started. Hi, Michelle, and welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast. I should say welcome back, since we already had this conversation once and it didn't work out so well, but the audience didn't get to hear that. So welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I really appreciate your doing this again. I know that, we're continents away, and, making a commitment to come back on the podcast, it feels big to me. So I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It should be an interesting conversation because it's been a while since the last one. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, it has. I know. Well, here in the US, lots has changed. But
Indeed.
yeah. But talk to me a little bit about what's happening in your world, but also giving the audience, the listeners, a little bit of info about you, the work you do, and why you do that work.
Yeah, well, my goodness. Well, I'm in Australia, although I grew up in Atlanta. So my family is in Atlanta, lots of family and friends and clients in the States. But I've been in Australia for the past 20 years, actually. And I am a trauma specialist and mindfulness coach. And I really got my start in bodywork. So that was the introduction I had to this therapeutic world. And it was a very unexpected introduction. I actually did a PhD in economics and lived in a settlement camp and studied poverty and intergenerational trauma and a social movement in the 90s, and then had a whole kind of, life crisis, I suppose you could say, when my marriage ended. And I retrained. I retrained as a practitioner, and I went to Bodywork only because I was invited to do a workshop, and it was a de-armoring workshop. And I found de-armoring is a form of body work. I can tell you more about that in a minute. But I found when I was receiving it that I was, without speaking, it was not talk therapy. It was directly connecting with the body. I was having emotions and memories of childhood stuff that I hadn't remembered that just was really present and then felt like it released. And that really began my journey. I got a lot of healing out of that. I trained in that method. But then I went on and trained in a bunch of other more conventional bodywork modalities, as well as hypnotherapy, coaching, and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I feel as if, and I'm very grateful that this is the case, but it seems like the body work and trauma has really just, I don't know if it's exploded, but it's becoming more a part of the treatment or of the process, the healing, I should say. And that feels really important.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's a lot of good research about how when you incorporate the asomatic approach to therapy, somatic meaning of the body, the outcomes are much better, even just to the extent of becoming aware of how your body is feeling and experiencing reality. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that it hasn't been the case that we've included it.
Really, it's a little head scratching, right? You're like, why not? But
Yeah.
I would say personally, the level of healing for me has changed when I've incorporated body work. And that's been really, truly eye-opening, but it also has helped me in terms of my therapy practice, helping clients too.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we need everything. We need to have the body, but we also need to be able to articulate our feelings and emotions and look at our thought processes. So it's all really useful. But yeah, we absolutely need to have that piece of it, the body. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, today I'd love to focus the conversation around preverbal and developmental trauma. And because that feels because we're talking about body work, I would imagine that that's incredibly important there, since maybe there aren't words to describe what happened. I mean, if it's preverbal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, preverbal trauma, of course, is trauma which happens before you're able to really remember it, much less articulate it through your words. That's the verbal part. And it's very common. It's not just things like abuse, physical harm. It's also neglect. It's also abandonment. It's having a caregiver disappear. It's having your cries ignored on a regular basis. We know so much about what that early trauma does to the brain, to the nervous system. And then developmental trauma, you may remember it or not, but, it happens when you're still developing, during your child years. And in my journey, I think because I started out in body work, I saw so much release without necessarily that cognition. So people would have experiences of fragments of emotion and memory, and they would feel a shift, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to say, this is what happened, or to make sense of it. And yet there was healing nonetheless. And it's interesting in my journey what I've also found out, as I went on, but later, the therapeutic world is really it's really had a basis in talk therapy and that verbal communication since the psychoanalysts, last century with Freud and Jung. Like, the tradition of talk therapy has really influenced to a huge extent how we understand healing. And I even participated in some professional workshops in a 12-step program and in a psychiatric hospital. And it was really fascinating to me how, the dialogue was always centered on memory, what you remember. And the people who got something out of those programs, they had incidents in their life that they could point to and say, this happened to me. But some of the clients I've had who've not been successful in those treatment programs, they haven't been successful because they couldn't contribute. They didn't have anything they remembered. And they would walk away going, well, it wasn't for me. It didn't work. Maybe there's something wrong with me because these people had terrible lives, but mine wasn't so bad. And it's because they didn't remember what happened. So, it's very possible not to be served by some forms of therapy if that's what you're really grappling with, is that preverbal developmental trauma where you don't necessarily remember it. And that's where the body really comes into play.
Absolutely. And when you're working with clients who potentially have had either preverbal or developmental trauma, what are some signs for you that you're recognizing, okay, maybe there's more here that it can't be verbalized or that isn't remembered? How are you picking up on that?
First thing I notice as a body worker would be what I call armoring or muscle tightness in different parts of the body that can't be explained through injury, illness, etc. That when you touch them, they're very contracted and very sensitive to pain, and and often there's like an emotion that comes out when you physically engage with that part, like under the ribs, abdominal area, hips, whatever it is. Like as a body worker, that's one of the first things I would notice. But if someone were to come to me and we weren't doing body work yet, or we were exploring other modalities, and they were just feeling this nameless sense of dis-ease with life, like there's something wrong, I don't know what it is. Often it's when there's a sense of worthlessness, like maybe it's not something that would come out immediately, because people don't usually say, well, actually I feel like maybe I'm not worthy of being here on this planet. But often you can get to that, and that core belief is usually a direct result of preverbal trauma, because when something happens to you and you are not able to articulate it, because you're not in the verbal stage of development, you're in a survival stage. Like human infants are incredibly helpless, the most helpless of all mammals. We require constant caretaking and touch and so on. And our whole system at that stage is really geared towards survival, and we're learning what emotional connections, we're learning attachment through our caregivers. But because we are not at a later stage of development, we're not really interpreting the environment with our logical brain. Anything that happens then triggers our sense of, well, I'm not safe in this world, so maybe I shouldn't be here. And that and over time there develops this belief of maybe I'm not worthy of being here. So that's a real giveaway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have been in a trauma consultation group with a couple of therapists for a while. And one of the things we've been talking about is that sense of, like, in adulthood too, saying the sense that it's not worth living versus
Yes.
I want to kill myself. It's like, if I could just take myself away, then maybe things would be better. Like, that to me really resonates around this too.
Yeah, like that. It's, they call it suicidal ideation, right? This constant desire for not being alive that doesn't seem to connect to anything in their life. You can have people who say that and you're like, but like there are all these like amazing things, but there's this like pervasive feeling of I just don't want to be here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Or something that resurfaces when things are difficult, but it's not like active, like I'm going to go now and do this thing. It's just this felt sense of like, maybe things would be better if I wasn't here.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Very true. Yeah.
And so you, at the very beginning, you talked about de-armoring. That sounds really intriguing. I'd like to know more about that and how that might help with, just what we're talking about.
So de-armoring is often called tantric de-armoring or shamanic de-armoring, and it's a very unusual modality. It's a lineage tradition. So it's not like an incorporated program that you do that's, through a body. It's you have a teacher who has a teacher who has a teacher. And it kind of it originated through Wilhelm Reich's work. He was a psychoanalyst in the 30s, a very controversial figure, a very interesting figure. But one of the many things he did was discover that if he was doing psychoanalytic work with a client and he touched certain parts of their body, they would have a reaction that seemed to be a release of emotion. And so he coined this word de-armoring, but really it's been around in First Peoples traditions and Native American traditions for eons. And so my teacher came from a more Native American tradition. He had a teacher, and it combines deep acupressure points with a bit of energy work, like Reiki, not Reiki, but a similar energy work. And it's those, so a client would lie on the table on their back and they would receive touch on the front of their body in key points, which actually correspond to a lot of what we know from acupressure from traditional Chinese medicine. So we would work with the rib cage, as I mentioned before, the hips, the middle area, the psoas, points around the face, and so on. And it can be a very shocking way to release because it's often painful for the client when they have a lot of stuff they're holding. And I always know if someone doesn't have a lot of stuff they're holding, because you can just dig your hands right in under a rib cage or something, and they don't, and it's like nothing. And I know in my journey, when I started out, I would just be crying. It would be incredible. But then over time, there isn't anything you can really do now to that to those points in my body that elicit any kind of reaction. And it's a very powerful, very alternative practice. And what I did with it was, I had an incredible teacher who was, a bodyworker trained in many different traditions, but I didn't feel that I was understanding necessarily what was happening. It was very much a practice that you learn and you do. And, you have to be in that intuitive space and that connected space. But with my academic background, I wanted to understand it. So I went on and I did qualifications in myofascial release, which is part of the osteopathic tradition, cranial sacral therapy. And what I learned, and then I went on to do biodynamic cranial touch, this is all part of the osteopathic tradition. And I learned, very interesting, that in these other traditions, they had a similar phenomenon that happened when people had emotional release through bodywork. And in that tradition, they call it unwinding. And it's very similar to what happens in de-armoring. So what I got from that is that, to some extent, the body responds as the body responds, regardless of what tradition we bring to it. And the key is really having a practitioner who's done enough body work that they can be aware and be present and facilitate an emotional outcome, because it's not about that physical adjustment, the physical fixing of things that are not in alignment. It's really about holding space for the emotional release.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me how much energy is held, especially traumatic energy, is held in our bodies.
Yeah.
That just kind of blows my mind. And that it can be released, which is amazing. It's kind of exciting to me too.
Yeah, it is. You probably know all about Peter Levine and his work, somatic experiencing, which is another really interesting. There are other things as well, like TRE, trauma release. I always forget if it's experience or trauma TRE. Another form of where you create a shaking response in your legs, and that also can reset the nervous system. That was invented, for PTSD. For veterans, basically, who came back from wars, who are experiencing PTSD. There are a lot of amazing traditions, and it's when you bring your attention to the body, it can be pretty magical, because a lot of people they're not ready to talk, or they don't want to talk, or they don't remember stuff that's happened, but they know that there's something that needs to come out. They know that there's something not right. And yeah.
Well, and I was just going to interrupt you, but I was going to say too, we're, especially Western culture, so geared toward disconnecting from our body and not tuning in and not paying attention to what those body cues are, that it's easy not to really know what's happening, even when it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're so disconnected. Yeah. And it's only increasing. I mean, though, as you
Mm-hmm.
say, I was going to say it's increasing because, we all have devices and technology has become a huge distraction. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, there is more and more awareness of the importance of body-based therapies and in using them, in conjunction with psychotherapy or,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I am hopeful that that will continue to be the trend.
yes.
Um, um, so if clients are coming to you, saying they're not feeling as if, like there's some flaw within them. There's something wrong inside. And so you're kind of picking up, maybe there's more going on developmentally or, preverbal that had happened to them in their life. So how are you finding ways to approach this with them and then, bring about healing? Because I would imagine too, sometimes people are like, yeah, my childhood was great. There wasn't anything there. I don't need to go
Yeah.
there.
I hear that all the time. I'm sure you hear that too,
I
Elizabeth.
do. I
It's,
do.
it's great. And then they start talking and you're like,
Right,
maybe you
right.
should look at that.
Exactly. I had this
Yeah.
nanny that never picked me up and yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was the youngest child in a family of 12 and we lived on a farm and it was great. It was awesome. And I'm thinking, how much time does a parent have for child number 12 on a farm?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. How much attention were you getting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as
Yeah.
you know, the window is always in the present moment. This is the
Mhm.
people always come to see a practitioner because there's something they're grappling with right now. And that right now moment is the window to all of the other moments that connect to the feeling that you have.
Mhm.
Emotion. And of course, they come because there's something emotionally not right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emotion is so embedded in memories and the connectivity of all of our memories and how they create this tapestry and then we make meaning of them. So just someone coming and saying, right now, I'm not happy because of this thing that's happening with my boss in my job, that could open a doorway to, whatever else it is. It could open a doorway even to preverbal trauma because there's something in there that they can't quite articulate. They're having a body reaction that doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
And so, we start with just exploring that verbally and then of course if I'm in person, because I do a lot of Zoom calls as well, but if I'm in person, sometimes then body work is appropriate. But we always start with right now
Mhm.
and take it from there really.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and speaking of Zoom, we're doing this conversation obviously because you're in Australia over Zoom.
Yeah.
Um, are you finding it just as effective? Because it sounds like you've been seeing clients from around the world already. Is
Yeah.
body work? Are you able to be as effective with some of the body stuff via Zoom?
Well, it's funny because people when I do a Zoom call, there's always a lot of that somatic work, that body-based awareness, and in a lot of different ways, from feeling and sensing to can we try moving this energy? Can you put your hand here? It can be that.
Hmm.
And my clients on Zoom, because they're often international, they don't know what it's like to do body work with me. So they seem quite happy. Like no one's ever said, "Oh, if only I could do body work," because they don't know their experience of me as that.
Yeah.
However, my clients in Sydney, if they have had body work with me, they are happy to do one or two talk sessions, but they always go, "Oh, I want to I want to see you again in the clinic." So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so I think it's just as effective, but people often they do crave that they do crave the touch and that engagement with the body and that freedom of not speaking and just receiving and
Mm.
experiencing.
Yeah. I have gone to a cranial sacral therapist a couple of times and
Yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, just the touch and yeah, not having to say anything, or if I feel like saying something I can, but how powerful it is and how much,
Yeah.
I mean, and for me, like just feeling the energy is just, it's crazy. Like
Yeah, it is. And I really think that we need both. That's, I guess, part of my whole approach and philosophy. And when I have clients who I just see on Zoom call, there's always a point at which I say, I really recommend that you seek this specific form of body work because of what you're communicating to me and what I'm seeing with you. I feel that this particular form might be really helpful for you. And I suggest that they do that as well, because it's, we need to have, we often need to have a balance, because then something will happen, in a bodywork session. And, not everyone who's trained in bodywork is also trained in that talk therapy. I wasn't initially, I had to go out and seek it. I had to go do training and coaching and mindfulness and working with clients and hypnotherapy. When you're trained in bodywork, you're often just trained to work with the body. And I know as a client that can be frustrating, because you've just had this massive experience and you're like, but, and the practitioner's like, okay, so that's normal. You're like, but I want to talk about it. This was profound.
Yes.
So
yes. No, I agree. I think it's yes, all the body work, I've been doing more as I've approached older age, whatever. I'm 60. It enhances my therapy sessions for sure. Like for myself, for my own therapy, just being able to process what happened, what came up for me, and how I see it relating to, my trauma.
Yeah.
I do have a history of trauma. Yeah. So, so how, talking about that so much is on Zoom now, how are things before we go to resources? I just want to check in and say, how are things there in Australia with the coronavirus and just life? How are things there?
Yeah, well, it's much better in Australia, and I know this, of course, because my family's in Atlanta, and I have many friends across the states, and it's a much different vibe here. I'm not in Victoria, so Victoria is another state here, and they had much stricter lockdown and many more cases. I'm in New South Wales, which is where Sydney is, the Olympic Sydney, and it hasn't been too bad. I mean, everyone's wearing masks out in public, but we've had very, very low numbers. Our schools were only out for 3 months. So school went back a few months ago. You could almost not notice it. You could almost not notice it. Yeah.
Wow. So different from here.
I mean, the economy has been, in shambles, but there's more government support. So a lot of people are getting extra monthly payments. It's a different world. So it's definitely. Yeah. And I know that people are suffering a lot more in the States at various levels. And, and I see that in my clients, people are experiencing, I just made a video on Instagram about it, or IGTV on Instagram about it. People are experiencing more, depression and hopelessness, and more emotional stuff is coming up that maybe they had thought that they were done with, and I think because
I agree,
everyone's at home and we're out of our routine, all of our strategies, everyone has a strategy for not maybe looking at stuff that happened in the past, or not dealing with just uncomfortable emotional stuff. Like all of our strategies kind of have fallen away in this new lifestyle that we're all leading, with isolation and fear and so on. And so old stuff is coming up. And so now what I'm seeing in people is like, is this new stuff or is this old stuff?
Yeah. No, I agree. Or it's new stuff that feels like old stuff, because the old memories, the old body stuff is coming up for sure.
Yeah.
So if there were resources, if people wanted to know more about either, developmental / preverbal trauma, or just body work in general, what resources would you recommend?
Well, I mean, the best book to kind of understand, and I think, is the Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, if I'm saying his name correctly. Really, that's really the best way to understand like what's happening in the body when trauma happens, and how your body just keeps the score, it remembers. If you're looking for a way of uncovering that, if you're already seeing a therapist, that locally they might know some other body-based modalities locally that you can see in conjunction with whatever you're doing. The things that I recommend, they're various. It really depends on what's happening. I've been meaning to put together a list of like different bodywork modalities and what specifically they're good for, because they all have different strengths and different relevance, but TRE is a good one. I think just in general, if you just want to see if there's what's there in your nervous system and discharge it, if you have a specific something that happened to you and you're still really unable to get that out of your mind, somatic experiencing is good, but that does require that you have a memory that you're working with very often.
Right.
Different kinds of body work, like biodynamic cranial touch from the osteopathic school.
Mm-hmm.
And even craniosacral therapy and myofascial release. If you look for, if you Google body work for emotional release, you're likely to find something.
Yeah.
Hopefully something locally. I've done that for my clients when I couldn't, when they were somewhere I didn't know, and I'd say, Google that and tell me what comes up.
Right.
because like I've sent people to see this, a woman in another state here who does myofascial release. Now, myofascial release is a great body work for physical therapy. A lot of this woman even has worked for sports teams and done that, to help. It's very, very gentle, but it also has a huge emotional component. But not all practitioners specialize in that. Not everyone's comfortable with that. So, but I found someone who does myofascial release, but she focuses on the emotional side of it.
Wow. That's
so
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just really doing a local search for yourself around what might be appropriate. And then if you have a therapist, checking in with them to make sure it's the right thing for you.
Yeah. They often will know as well. They will know.
Yes.
They'll know the good people that, they should.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't always. Yeah.
No, but hopefully, yes, because I have a group of women that I can recommend, or men too, but recommend people to, that will specialize in certain things that feel appropriate. Well,
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Michelle, how do people find you? Is there anything happening in your business that you want to share with the listeners?
You can find me just at my website, which is just michelledixon.com, michelle-dixon.com. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere in the notes.
Yes.
I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm just Michelle Dixon Healer on Instagram, but I am running a free emotional detox starting from the end of November, early December. And it's completely free. It's a little mini course that you can get even on your phone. There's an app for it, and it's just about how to emotionally detox, how to get emotion and memory, clear out your body as much as you can, and learn how to create boundaries around toxic people, celebrate the holidays the way you want to celebrate them. And it's specifically during the holiday period. It'll be running in a private Facebook group through December to support people through the holidays, because, when you've had emotional crisis or trauma, the holidays can be very triggering.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Cool.
It's a resource for people, and you can just find it if you just go to my website. You'll see links on the front page for joining that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I will include all the resources in the show notes, and I just so appreciate your taking the time to talk to me again and share your wisdom with the listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It's been a really good conversation, actually. It's been different from last time. It's been good.
Yeah. But that's the great thing, because then, it's just a whole new conversation. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Michelle. I feel as if, for me, bodywork has been incredibly important in my healing journey and has really shifted so much of the healing in pretty big ways, but in the moment don't feel that big, which is an interesting way to put it. But just the energy shifts that can happen with body work are so important. And I know that I've talked here about my intuitive movement group as well as craniosacral therapy. I am excited to explore Reiki at some point in the future when COVID isn't quite so terrible and intense. I hope you guys will check out Michelle's free resource. The emotional detox program sounds like just the thing we need for the holidays. Well, I hope you all are staying safe. I hope that if any of this information resonates for you, that sense of maybe things not feeling quite right or you feeling flawed in some way, that you seek help. You explore what options are available for you, whether it's therapy or body work. But tuning into the body is such an important piece that even over the next week, over the holidays, be mindful of your body and what it wants to tell you. Again, if you want more resources, if you want to follow what's happening in the podcast and in my business, please sign up for the newsletter, progressioncounseling.com/Elizabeth's newsletter. I hope you all have a wonderful week, have wonderful holidays. Ciao for now from this Woman Worrier.
Thanks for listening and subscribing to the Woman Worriers podcast. Music was written and performed by Andy Cush. If you'd like more information on this episode, you can find the show notes, the resources shared today, and links to the guests' profiles at womanwarriors.com.